now?
Let's do.
Okay, brilliant. Well, obviously, welcome to the System Design Think Tank, hosted by Soda Social. I'm Lloyd from Trust in Soda, and this webinar tonight is recorded. So if you would like to watch it back, you can do so. So handing over to Nur, who's going to introduce what the System Design Think Tank is.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lloyd. Welcome, everyone, and dear panelists, and really great to have you here. I'm very excited about tonight because system design is an emerging new practice that has been on for quite a while, but application of it is quite new for all of us. So for over the last 4 years, we've been trying to practice this with our clients, with our design teams, and we've run a number of events previously and received tremendous amount of questions. So every time we run an event, so there has been really great questions. But some of these that it requires thought leaders to come together like today and discuss these questions, because some of them, they don't have specific answers. So we're gonna learn probably as we go and as we practice. And this is the reason we started think tanks, and thanks for everyone. I'm today with a great team, and I'm looking forward to it. The one thing that I would like to note for attendees, after the events, we're going to have journals. So there will be recordings and also journals outside of these conversations. So please post questions that come to you as you listen to discussions or anything you may have, and hand it back to you.
Okay, fantastic. I think really now what we should do is introduce the panel. So start with ladies first.
I haven't actually introduced myself, so I should do that first. So I am Nur, and I work at Brilliant Basics. It's a design and innovation consultancy studios by Infosys. And in the panel today, I have my colleague, Jeff from Infosys. So we basically, I look after design practice, experience and strategy and system design. So this is where design comes as capital D, and looking across quite a lot of digital transformation projects with our clients, partnering with Infosys, and yeah, happy to be here today.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, please, Crystal.
Yes, I'm Crystal. I'm one of the partners of a design agency based in Brussels. I also teach at the University of Antwerp in product service systems and systemic design. And together with the university and with the agency, we've been developing since 2011 the Systemic Design Toolkit, which was then officially launched in 2017.
Okay, well, thank you. And over to you, please, Zeynep.
Okay, so thank you. It's Zeynep Engin. I'm a senior research fellow at UCL Computer Science. My interest is mainly public sector digital transformation in the governments globally. I do have, I'm leading a social enterprise that we call Data for Policy, community interest company, and that looks into this topic in particular. And we have an associated journal, Data and Policy, again in the same space. And my interest in system design is really, well, my understanding is at least everything that's relevant in this area put together in a logical way and in a useful way for both the technology producers and the users. And that's why I'm here to understand more of this space. So
okay, thank you. And over to you, please, Matthew.
Hi, my name is Matt. Matthew, only if I'm in trouble. I'm the global head of innovation for a consulting firm called Publicis Sapient. In that role, pretty much all that I do is systems design. My background, going back way too far, has more to do with complex adaptive systems and agent-based modeling. So much more of a computational and social science approach to systems design.
Okay, brilliant. And last but not least, Jeff, please.
Great, Jeff Kavanaugh, coming to you from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Very happy to be part of this. I lead the Infosys Knowledge Institute, a colleague of Nur's. The Knowledge Institute is the research and thought leadership arm of Infosys, large tech services and consulting company. We research and publish. We also look at a lot complex systems, both the technical, people, policy, financial aspects, and believe it's relevant because complex organizations are systems and systems of systems. And looking forward to taking part in this today.
Okay, thank you very much. So a really interesting panel here tonight. I think going into the questions then, the main one really, what is system design from your perspective, would you say? Should we open up to you first, Jeff?
Sure. I think it's multiple disciplines working together in concert to accomplish either an audacious goal or maybe solve a wicked problem. In some of our areas, we look at it as a system of systems. And I think the fundamental principle for me when we're looking at this in my research team is how can you connect the dots and think strategically while respecting the technical details within each component and then the interaction effects across them. You can do a lot more, but if you keep that in mind, it's a good start.
Okay, thank you. Crystal, what's your thoughts?
Well, I approach systemic design, I call it systemic design and not system design, as at first as a blend of systems thinking and design thinking. And then other disciplines came along, like psychology, sociology, etc. But it's merely these two worlds, design thinking and systems thinking. And as Jeff pointed out, it's a lot about looking at how the parts are connected and how they influence each other.
Okay, thank you. Matthew, your thoughts?
I first look at the design component and think of design as a discipline of creative problem solving. So when you apply that to systems, the question is how do we create and or intervene in systems all the way from the complicated to the truly complex, or even to say to the wicked, in order to get better outcomes or at least to negotiate better solutions.
Okay, thank you. And Zeynep?
Again, coming from a public sector background, I'm really interested in designing algorithmic systems that work with multiple sources of data, big data, small data, commercial data, open data, and everything sort of in that space, all the way to basically chatbots interacting with citizens, platforms, basically that again may make the information available on various things. And in between, we have got all these discussions around privacy and ethics and legality, algorithmic behaviors, whether the infrastructure, the intelligence, the knowledge generated. It's really a lot of dimensions, and what we see is usually each of these different areas are dealt with separate groups in various locations as well. So you don't see really that much of overall systems thinking, looking into all these aspects. And that's why I'm interested. That's what I understand really. That's why I'm here to understand, to develop my own maybe intuition about how we can put together all these components.
Okay, thank you. And over to you now.
I can't be more agree than what you guys described. For me, I'm coming from perhaps more service design side, where you kind of, if you start thinking about how services and products live, they actually start becoming more interfaces of some large, very complex systems. So this could be either technical systems and partnerships. And while I was working in the Innovation Center, the more and more we find out about the components and constraints and what really should involve in design, we then started thinking about, oh, I needed to invite environmentalists to my supply chain project. And this is not really how would I run, a typical service design project or even a design project. So then when we compare all different projects that we are doing, and instead of creating like a service blueprint or customer journeys, we don't have just one customer. We have like, 10 different groups that we need to look after while we are doing the end-to-end design. So I think that's where naturally we moved into it. I had no idea about really thinking more systemically and involving all these parties, but these projects, while practicing it, it just became a really important requirement. And then the output looked completely different. We co-created, co-generated it with the designers in the innovation centers. And that how it started, coming into my knowledge and my kind of area. I have a HCI background, but I have a computer science background. So I was more comfortable working in very, very technically complex projects, but also extend our experience to more sustainable projects like supply chain. And I don't think I had a definition. I don't think there's like a very simple definition, but I quite like what you mentioned, Christel. This is really blending design thinking and systems thinking. And the borders is almost, where are your system borders? So this is a really big question. It almost comes in every project. So not a quite definition, but that's how I approach system design.
Okay, brilliant. So some really interesting perspectives there. Matt, why do you think that we need system design?
Well, look, let's just be blunt. We've got some really big problems out there in the world. You can just turn on the news if you'd like your today's sample of terrifying things. And a lot of these problems root themselves in some systemic challenges that we have, whether you're talking about the kind of immediate things that have to do with the pandemic and its aftermath. But even behind that, you still have gross failures of equality in terms of social systems. You have healthcare systems that are strained to a breaking point. You have political systems and socioeconomic systems that haven't necessarily done more for the greatest number of people for less. So even though we've had a pretty good run in terms of prosperity for the past, say 2,000 years, we've still got a lot of stuff on our plate. So systems design is an absolutely critical methodology and discipline for starting to negotiate better outcomes. I think what's interesting is that for the past 300 years or so in terms of professional practices, we've just gotten more and more siloed into deep specialization. So I've gone from being an economist to being specifically a behavioral economist, or to being a mathematically driven behavioral economist. And what systems design and design thinking start to do is begin to create much more of an integrative discipline across all of the different economic silos that can allow us to actually work on some of these complex problems.
Okay, great. And Christel, do you have anything to add on to that, perhaps?
You are muted.
Okay, I completely agree, but there's also the fact that governments, they expect more and more from businesses to be responsible and to help out with these global problems. I even read this week that the European Union will have a law next year that it's even obligatory for companies to do good for people and planet next to businesses. So that's a good evolution, I think. And then there is another reason that systemic design is important, and it's because apparently the next wave of innovation that has been predicted is a mix of sustainability and technology.
Oh.
And I read today that pandemics always trigger the next wave of innovation. So after this pandemic, we can be sure we will be there. So businesses should be prepared for this.
I could say that there's every cloud has a silver lining then, really, with the wave of innovation of pandemic. Zeynep, what about you?
Okay, well, I'm again from more looking from the technology and public sector side, and we need system design for very fundamental reasons, for efficiency and for performance in the first place. You don't want to, you want to do things in a smart ways in order to avoid redundancy in the work that you're doing or these resources that you're allocating. Plus, the other thing is usability and accessibility and generally ease of use in general. If you are targeting, for me, I inevitably compare public sector applications with private sector applications. And if you look at, for example, the cases, the usability of innovation that's produced in organizations like Google, Facebook, or like some of those major organizations versus what we have got in government. It's over complicated on the second one, and it's over sort of it's really very little usable systems you see most of the time, which is which speaks itself, but which also basically brings up this intuition that we really need more of systems thinking and systems design for public sector applications and for common good, for and technology for good, AI for good type of applications.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I think it's for as well as public sector, I think it applies to client as well. Back to Crystal's point, this is actually becoming more motivation, and government's actually forcing companies to do good and to be good. They actually have set of deadlines, like in Finland, 2030, they have to be zero carbon neutral. So for me, most of the time, I think when we talk to clients, what they are really buying into, like cost savings, and also like efficient processes, because a lot of systems that they actually practice or they use to deliver their services is probably done like during industrial era, right? So how supply chain works today, how procurement works today. So I think they really like this idea of, oh, I can solve my cost problems with this and I can automate things. So there's this big hunger of, you know, oh, I want to get AI, I want to get things, you know, really, you know, efficiently. But I think this is where systems thinking, especially like ethical design, we as design group, we are responsible to bring this awareness to, you know, what are the consequences. And I think the society needs it, companies needs it. And I think we also, like as a world where we head into, we do need wider and bigger thinking, involve more parties to make a decision. Who am I to make a decision about hospital? Or like, who am I to make a decision about how supply chain should work? But if I'm designing a product or turning an idea into a real quick prototype, I can bring best user experience and I can make that decision about that product. But when you think bigger, it's really big responsibility to make decision in design. So I think this is also really key for, you know, decisions need to be collaboratively taken and by the right expert groups. Maybe I'm more diving into how it should be, but I think this requires awareness. So there is unfortunately not enough, I guess, like we need to educate. So it's almost like how user experience, you know, 10, 15 years ago starts kicking off, where you have to explain UX inside the bracket, so what it is. So I think it's kind of systemic thinking, system design, for in practice in lots of places kind of that level in baby steps yet.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And Jeff, lastly you. Jeff, I think you're on mute.
That's right. Are we still in the definition? Or are we moving past more to application?
Well, you know, it's more, why do we need it?
Oh, well, I think that Matthew's earlier point, things have gotten too complex. And I had an engineering background. And if you think about physics, the unified field theory, systems design is kind of like a unified field theory. It respects distinct disciplines, but it also, there's a discipline of connecting them together and being able to equate, to calculate, to design. And I think that's really important, because most intelligent people, most people who give things thought, understand and respect things are complex individually, and you can't ignore that. You've got to back it with science. At the same time, you also have to figure out the interactions. And so I think that's why it's so important. And maybe to the pandemic innovation point, I think people in times of stress are more likely to listen, and they're more likely to take action. So I think the time is very much now for systems design to be looked at as a framework or possible approach to address some of these thorny issues.
Yeah, I completely agree. Matt, what would you say the type of problem system design can help to solve?
Well, is that to me?
Oh, go ahead.
To me, go ahead, Matthew. Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a few of the kinds of challenges. And I can speak to it from an innovation point of view in the private sector, where I spend most of my time. And I want to come back to an objection, by the way, or something for Noor and for Crystal to consider, which has more to do with the relationship between public policy and private interest in terms of who should actually tackle some of the kind of ecological, social issues. But look, the reality is simple innovations, whether they be feature improvements or new products or really kind of investments in taking cost and complexity of operations, they just don't yield great results anymore. So as more and more organizations try to figure out like what's the next big market opportunity, there are these huge problems, whether it be dealing with pollution and sustainability questions, whether it has to do with healthcare outcomes, whether it has to do with questions around security. And I think more and more private institutions are looking for innovative ways to try to create new commercial models, totally new propositions, whole new strategies to figure out how they can try to create better outcomes for lots of different actors in the systems, buyers and suppliers, consumers, providers, and how they can begin to profit from that. And to be blunt, I'd much rather see private industry start to take responsibility for their externalities like pollution, like social injustice, because they have the motivation to find things that work and profit and scale them probably faster than government could mandate them as either quotas or objectives. I'm not against government intervention and target setting, but if we can actually help people profit by doing good through systems design, then we've got ourselves something fun.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, touching on the problems there, Crystal, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, in our practice, we have been doing a lot of societal projects for governments or NGOs, a couple for businesses, but most projects for businesses were or in sustainability or in creating ecosystems to create more innovation in a region or even in Europe. So we didn't yet did projects really business.
Okay, and Zeynep, well, how about you?
Okay, on the, well, I sort of look at this again from more from the technology side instead of the user side, and I'm thinking that it's really what we are sort of a new constraint or maybe a new contribution of the whole thing is of whole digital revolution is that we now have engineers and computer science specialists determining actually how the life looks like and how do we respond to various challenges and various problems in this sort of evolution. During this evolution, they are basically essentially now shaping how our future will look like. And well, if we can bring more systems design and thinking into that level of technology, then I think we have got huge gains for as a society when designing our futures, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. And moving on now, Matt, how would you say that system design can apply to a business?
Well, I mean, it can be applied on the system that is the business and helping leaders understand how that business actually works. I mean, most of our clients right now are spending billions in transforming themselves from paper-based organizations to some digital incarnation of themselves. And I don't think it's unkind to say that many of them are struggling their way through that because they don't understand the unintended consequences of pulling a plug or cutting a wire or introducing new ones. So I think there's a very pedestrian set of applications for systems design, which is helping these systems we call companies change themselves. I am, because I get paid to, far more interested in how do these systems not just turn themselves into a digital version of a bank or a pharmaceutical company, but how do they turn themselves into a producer of financial inclusion or into somebody who actually delivers better healthcare outcomes? Again, I think the application of system design into the business realm is probably at its finest and most sort of honorable if it's actually targeting some of the wicked social challenges, geopolitical challenges that we face. I mean, I'll give you an example. Recently, there's a UK bank that has started to put out a credit scoring system for its corporate clients, which essentially says this is what your carbon footprint looks like in the UK. And you can imagine they're going to create a cap and trade scheme for consumers to be able to buy and offset their carbon consumption, which we've tried on a national level, but to have on a consumer level could be an absolute game changer. But it does require a really studied appreciation for how both the ecological impacts of all the companies in the UK actually add up, and then what are the right incentives to get consumers to buy the right things for the right reasons. And there are hundreds of more of second and third order consequences that need to be considered. So I'm really excited that these kinds of companies are starting to think much more deliberately, dare I say, systemically, about how they can do good.
Okay, brilliant. And Crystal, do you have anything to add to that, maybe? Hello?
Is that for Jeff?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I wasn't sure if that was for Crystal or for Jeff. I'm echoing what Matthew said. I think one particular example is we do a lot of work with smart buildings, smart spaces, and it is a classic example of something that you can't move. It's fairly static, and it is a system of systems. And there's an explosion of activity in this area where not only making them more connected and more intelligent, also expanding the perceived role. To Matthew's point, a building owner, well, they're letting people know how healthy the building is. They're letting people know how ecologically friendly it is. And the interesting thing is, beyond these important things, on their own, there's a financial aspect as well, because there's a valuation multiple that starts being attached. And real estate probably is something that's more definitive because you can value it. It is bought, it is sold, it is leased, it is managed. More so than sometimes enterprises. That gets a little bit hard to measure. And so by seeing this 50%, that's what people are saying now, 50% on these more intelligent buildings that are doing this, that's a multiple that these property managers, no matter how aesthetically pleasing the architecture looks from the outside, if you don't think about the systems design element, then you're not only leaving money on the table, but you're also financially shortchanging yourself more broadly.
Okay, brilliant. And do you have anything to add to that, maybe?
So I quite agree with, this needs to be profitable for clients, for businesses to, start looking at. So profit either, developing new business models, but also meeting some sustainability standards, but needs to be beneficial and impactful for them. I think that needs to be clearly positioned, communicated, educated. But at the same time, I kind of feel partnership model, it's really powerful. I think back to Matt's example on how a bank actually builds a credit scoring based on carbon neutral, but also we see more and more new generation of products that are, a combination of 2 or 3 companies coming together to deliver that. So there is a second-hand car platform in Germany. So this platform calls AUTO1. What they do, they provide this end-to-end experience, end-to-end service. So you can buy the car, finance the car, deliver it to your door, insure the car exactly on the same platform, completely seamlessly. But behind this service, Deutsche Bank, Aviva, and AUTO1 is the companies. So I think one of the core things that we can, I think the system design, or if you create that system map of a company, or a system of a company, it's almost like in design we do as is. What is as is system looks like, and where you are today, what are the weakness or strength of your system, and start maybe looking for opportunities and move towards more innovation and find more innovation partners based on strength and weakness of your system. I think that's also creates a lot of opportunity for new breed of products, one-stop shop type of next generation products. That's maybe much better than a single company trying to deliver on their own, And there's one example in the UK, Barclays and Costa, they created a refilled coffee cup. It's a prototype, but you can actually refill your coffee, but pay with the same refill cup at the same time. So you don't take the journey to take out, you know, payment methods if you don't have a smartwatch or anything. So it's just making life simply better, but also delivering, you know, innovative, sustainable, good products, you know, based on your strength, and being partnered with completely random or different companies that you would never think of.
Okay, brilliant. And you know, with stuff like this, how do you think that this approach helps governments and organizations during COVID-19? I think we forced to go through this journey, right? So we had an office. We knew, I mean, most of us, we all work, you know, digitally heavy on technology. So it's all right for us. But even us, we just became, instead of one single studio, we became like 150 different studios, so all connected and all, you know, trying to find a better ways to collaborate, and screen times extends, etc. So imagine like large organizations that, you know, they may not work this collaborative, or, you know, they may not have even access to Miros and, you know, create these interactive boards. I think companies are forced to do overnight digitization as part of COVID. And that's, you know, we talked about previously with you guys, the challenge, there are different problems, but now there's also emergency problems. I think, Crystal, you talked about that. I think COVID is an emergency problem that everyone needs to tackle individually, organization-wise. And yes, maybe this is the time to really bring this up and have more system design conversations with our clients, and how can we help at this stage. What do you think, Crystal?
Well, the sudden outbreak of COVID, or the rapid spread, is definitely an emergency problem. But COVID itself, I think it's a systemic challenge because there are so many underlying causes that are linked together. For example, I read that the COVID, one of the triggers of the causes of COVID is the deforestation, because we are limiting the ecosystem of animals. And so they are coming closer to the people, and the viruses jump from the animals to the people. And it's just one of the reasons underlying the COVID. So it would be very interesting. Terry Irwin is doing an investigation on this.
That's a really interesting point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, being conscious of the time, as we will be going into questions soon, I have one last question, really, which I'll open up to the panel. Where do you think system design can help? Say something like a product, service, or a system.
Well, in terms of COVID, sorry, but just because I completely agree with Crystal and the observation she made, that you can take system design and you can try to apply it to a preventive strategy. So what are the causes of these kinds of biological incidents or ischemic events that basically where a virus jumps from one species to another? And you can try to create a system or change the system to prevent it from happening, or at least happening less frequently. You also have systems design applied to developing strategies, either for healthcare delivery or economic recovery, where the intention is to minimize the spread and the diffusion, to create systemic resilience in those systems. And look, that's been around for years and years. One of the people with whom I used to work is a guy named Josh Epstein. He did a brilliant piece of research in the 1990s around how to stop weaponized smallpox. We have systems level strategies for dealing with pandemics. This is why I'm really excited by Zeynep's work, which is, can you bring the data from that work to public policymakers to now appreciate we have a very real live data set that tells us how expensive these things are if we fail to execute these systemic strategies.
I can actually add on to these COVID-19 comments as well in two interesting just notes. I don't know how relevant they are, but I think the first one is basically, it was a surprise for me to see that it was actually an AI startup in Canada who initially spotted the COVID-19 in Wuhan, in this market, basically. And it was, I think they spotted it on 30th of December, something like around those dates. And that's 1 week before World Health Organization ever mentioned about something like that. I think this is a really interesting one, thinking about really a small startup in Canada, in a Western liberal country, being able to spot an issue and an ongoing activity in somewhere in China, basically. And if you think about the cultures and the collaboration cultures in particular, very different. I think there is really interesting lessons there to think about how we work, how we collaborate, and how we design transnationally in these situations. And the other thing that I wanted to just flag is, again, it's not just how we are responding or how we are tracing the COVID cases. It's also everything else, really. I mean, we were thinking about, we were talking more about a generational shift onto a more online lifestyle. But now what we have seen, like over a few weeks' time, within a few weeks' time, everyone had to sort of adapt to the new situation, and old and young, the rich and poor, well, with different degrees maybe, but we have seen this adaptation, and we have seen everything, again, education, shopping, social life, everything moving on to an online space and being different than before. And there we have taken the advantage of, I think, platforms that has come over the past maybe decade only, and that's the huge difference, huge advantage maybe. I don't know how much you can talk about an advantage in this sort of situation, but that's what makes it very different from past pandemics, and that shows also, to me, that shows the power of how you can design easier, more usable. I mean, why we should be thinking about more usable and more sort of systemic systems for everyone.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. We're going into questions now, unless anyone else has anything to add onto those points. Has anyone else got anything?
Maybe just one thing. I always tell my students that as a designer, you should look at products and services as leverage points in the system. So always think about how can they help to trigger the change. Okay,
brilliant. Thank you. No, do you have anything else, anyone, before we open up the questions on the board? You want me?
That's actually a really, really important point, Krista, we just made. Would you elaborate on that a little bit? So really taking that products and service angle and to really think through a system. Could you tell us a little bit more on that?
Well, it's a bit the opposite as what we are learned as designers. As designers, we are used to look at a part of the system and thinking, how can we make this more efficient, better looking, less costing, but we never think about what is this effect of this product or service in the rest of the system. In systemic design, you do the opposite. You first look at the whole system and all the forces in the system, and then you discover places where it would be good to intervene, leverage points, and then you can start to think what product or service or even process or activity should I create to trigger the change.
Mm-hmm. And that's becoming really important if you consider almost products are now more smart, they engage with us completely in a different way, and data can be, I think, sometimes way too transparent. If Zeynep, you talked about algorithmic fairness, for example. I think it's a really, really important angle, and it could be also for as designers, as we design products and services, this might be our tipping points where we can start thinking about how our product's going to live within ecosystem and what would be the consequences, really predict and try to foresee, what are the type of issues that this product might have in the future, not just, deliver it and get it out the door.
But the consequences is just step one. It's even more important to see them as change makers.
That's a really important point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And if we can just ask the panel to look at the Q&A box there on the right. We've got some great questions coming in. Is anybody with that? I think Serge there has a great question. Can everyone see Serge's? No, can you see that?
Yes, I can see the questions. Yeah, I now see the questions.
Yeah. Should we answer Serge's question here?
No, that's a tough one. Let's avoid that one.
Okay, does anyone have a suggestion for which one?
Well, let's answer Serge's question. I mean, that's a really great one. So I think we've touched on it a couple of times. Zeynep, I know you've talked about it, but there's a question around who gets to determine what is a positive outcome. And I think it would be arrogant for an individual designer to sit down and say, I think the right outcome is this, because they're just going to be completely oblivious to those second and third order consequences. And I don't have a good answer to how do you determine what is a positive outcome and who needs to be involved. I think it's something we're going to have to thrash our way through.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone got anything to add to that?
I keep thinking about it might be again a completely different example, but I kept thinking about the experience with the Bitcoin situation, for example. I mean, we were all very excited about the fact that it was becoming more like cashless industry or cashless world or trustless world. I mean, not thinking about really intermediaries and things like that. But at the end, what we ended up with having is an environmental situation where we realize that actually those sort of really highly complex computations that this technology required is actually damaging the environment in like previously unpredicted scales. And yeah, how do you judge? I mean, how do you judge then? Yes, it has got it comes with this sort of environmental cost, but at the same time there is this huge value in thinking about this trust being more distributed and more sort of without the intermediate organizations. It's a very hard problem in many technology problems, like again what Nur was mentioning in terms of algorithmic transparency problem, for example, algorithmic fairness problem, for example. What we see is systems, again, risk assessment tools, for example, in banking, in loan decisions, or we have got recruitment systems, again, sifting algorithms, sort of shortlisting candidates for specific roles, preferring some candidates over others for various reasons, for interesting reasons sometimes. Or we see some of those systems being used in criminal justice system, making decisions about how long do you send someone to prison, basically. And how do you assess in those situations, really? I mean, your system might be working perfectly, but there are lots of issues still, and it's very conflicted case in many situations. Again, how do you weigh, how do you balance which objective do you prioritize your and which again what is the criteria for optimizing your system? Huge complex area to work at, and unless you have a holistic view of the whole space, there is no way you will make any progress in this. It's not performance, it's not coming up with cheaper, better, faster products. Really, it's more legal, more ethical, more fair products that we're sort of getting into in the second phase, what we call second phase of digital revolution, perhaps.
I think the only thing I would like to add to that is, especially when we are designing automation, AI-driven products, often these solutions might, take over someone else's job. So the workforce of the future, it may not look like what it is today, and there's potential area that lots of companies looking into that. But if you have cost saving or cost cutting, using these automations and in a way that it causes lots of trouble for the employees of today, and that's also I think an outcome that's really, really important. So it's not just solutionizing, this is the solution that's going to solve the X and Y problem, but actually creates another big problem. So that our solution then becomes the problem creator, in that way.
Yes, I want to add another example actually in terms of what algorithms are doing. If you think about search engines, for example, where most of us rely on to get new information, some new knowledge about any topic of our interest. I mean, it's very logical that they prioritize information for various criteria that they think would be important. But at the same time, we do see that these search results also determining the way that we think about the topic and how we form an opinion in that space. Or generally, I mean, if it is not a search engine, if you think about in terms of the music that you're listening or the recommendations for films or news items that you're getting, then your life, your world is basically becoming more and more skewed at the same time as well. And how do you again compensate these sort of issues with the optimal outcome?
There's actually a really good article. If I find it, I'll definitely share it with you all. It's about virtual bubble. So like your world becoming a virtual bubble, and the way you interact with the internet and technology, that's basically how your world is, and all the recommendation and resources you're finding, it's kind of follows certain patterns and algorithm that Google might put it out there.
Sorry, Lloyd,
before you move on.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I'll go to answers. The one thing that we see come up a lot is polarized thinking. So people struggle with this and either don't want to adopt something because of those risks, or they like you said, they blindly jump into it. I think if you can just deconstruct and maybe stratify the elements into the things that are more objective, that aren't as contentious, versus the ones that do require the more nuances, you can make progress. And once that flywheel starts spinning and people are generally starting to solve those, we found that the tougher ones become a bit easier to solve, at least in our corporate settings and working with clients, because there's a general momentum that you gain. I've seen so often people trying to solve everything before they start looking at the whole system, solving everything. There are certain things that are more objective, and if you can isolate those at least and make some decisions, again, knowing the interaction effects, there is some momentum it generates. Go ahead, Matthew.
I only wanted to underscore a couple of the points that Noor was making, and Zeynep were making too, which is, and some of the questions that are coming in, which have to do with whether or not systems design could be used to engender winner-take-all business models or monopolies. The answer is yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now you've got a debate happening between Facebook and Twitter and different governments about whether or not the system is designed as a optimum way to deliver freedom of expression, or whether it's designed to deliver truth. And policymakers and regulators are caught right in the middle. If you look between the west coast of the US, within the European Union, and within China, you've got three vastly different attitudes towards data privacy. And as a result, you have in the US, you have the emergence of social media platforms like Facebook. In China, you've got WeChat, and you've got whole platforms that are optimized to facilitate expression and communication. Whereas in the EU, we value data privacy. And so we're actually trying to block or break down some of these winner-take-all business models. As a society or societies, we're going to have to negotiate what is the optimum outcome. Right now, you're seeing, I think, evidence that we just don't know.
Okay, thank you very much. If everyone can see here, I think, Crystal, this could be a good question for you from Richard here. Richard says, we have heard about why holistic system design thinking is so important, but we'd be interested to hear about the techniques that the team are using to both understand systems and also to bring about change in those systems, ideally with real life examples.
Well, that's why I made the toolkit, is to make this easier to do. So basically what you do in the beginning is you try to really understand what is the system about, who's involved there, who are the actors. Very important is to look for emerging initiatives, so new initiatives that are doing things differently, and look what you can learn from them, and if you can try to see if you can connect them. Then what you also do is you go out, you interview the most diverse actors in your system, and you try to understand what are the contributing factors that make that we are now in the situation we are in. And from there, you make a system map with those factors. Then you look at the leverage points in the system. So the factors that are probably most contributing to the issue. And then as the next step is then to really be sure about the common purpose for the to-be system, and then start working and thinking about the intervention models you could apply on this. So the products and services as leverage points, plus things like rules, regulations, and to make the change in the system. So that's basically the most important you do. And then, of course, there is a very important part to scale this up in a learning network that also turns learning into action. And all that is also adaptive to the changing context. But Lloyd, I really like the question about the 5-year-old.
Yeah, at the bottom. Yeah, a very good question. Who would like to go first with? Just for the audience, the question is, if you were to explain systems design to a 5-year-old, what would you say? Would you like to open up with that, Noah?
Gosh, that's the hard one. I find it difficult to explain what design thinking is to the 5-year-old.
Can I try?
Yes, go ahead, please, take it.
So I would say to the kid, if you look at nature, you understand that everything is connected and that everything is dependent from each other. I mean, the rabbit needs the grass, needs the air, needs the water, the fox needs the rabbit, etc., etc. Only the grown-ups have forgotten that.
Wow,
I love that.
Very good. I like that very much. Does anyone else have their explanation for a 5-year-old?
I would take Crystal's explanation.
Okay then. And I think lastly, here, if we look at the very bottom question here, it says, what are the challenges to offering system design to your clients? Now, what would you say to that?
We have been working with clients. So either they really love it or they think it's too big and they want something very, very specific. So it's really the profile you need to match this with, I think. And the conversation. So normally I think to continue having conversation around user-centered design is really good because we have really well-established methodologies. It's industry recognized, how psychology feeds into research. So I think these are all like really well-established and it's understood. So you don't spend so much effort. But if you, bring that, even just a nature example, like I think 5 years old will understand better than adults probably. Because it's just, scary, when you think about, okay, we're going to create this end-to-end map, but then, everyone is really interested in end-to-end digital transformation. So the way I go with normally is to extend the field research and showcase some system maps. One of the challenges, you can't show someone's map to another because, it's really details of someone's system, unless it is a public system map. So, try to collate like my, support examples because you can't really showcase a lot of projects in terms of systems. So, yeah, it's the hard one. Yes, it is hard both trying to, put the proposition together specific to a client because you also really need to a little bit understand their, their challenge area. And then number 2 is also, really convince them to get the right parties in, probably that's also very hard because they might really want to focus on specific product and a service. If you ask them like, oh, I need economists, I need behavioral scientists here. And they might say like, oh, we don't have budget for that. So there are challenges. And I think, some of these are the ones that I'm facing.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Matt, would you say that you have similar challenges?
I think if you look at systems design as a discipline and you then apply it to things like service design, I don't think you're going to have any challenge in selling it in. I mean, I think as talks about the mechanics of how you do that. I think if I think about systems design at the level of how do I change financial inclusion in Southeast Asia, which is a thing we're doing or talk we're giving next week. Or even in the UK with Alison Rose, who's the new CEO of NatWest RBS. trying to basically make financial services inclusive to more women. I mean, you're looking at leaders who want to make a dent in their particular corner of the universe, and systems design is a disciplined way of helping them to do that. And I think if you can find those people who want to make that difference, and you can bring the political will and the actual working know-how, you'll find it's not that hard.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, have you had similar experiences?
I have, echo what Matthew said. If you can find those people, then yes. It is a challenge to find them, because you've got to find the person that is responsible and owns it, and of course has a passion or an interest in changing. Since he already talked about that example, I think the other one, going back to these smart spaces, is you may need to get 2 or 3 individuals, like a consortium. Maybe it's someone who, in that example, runs a building or owns a building, and then someone else that might be the local government official that you're working with that also has enough power and authority or influence, and it also gets it. And then finally, the ecosystem aspect, at least the critical mass of the partners, because maybe it's a company like one of the ones on our call today. It could be a technology company that brings something really interesting that connects, or it's AI, or it's something else that they don't have. So I think it's a combination of a person or a small number of people that are both responsible and maybe visionary enough, and then also other individuals who can work as a consortium and also work fairly quickly towards outcomes, because otherwise you can get hung up in processes and diagrams and managing every nth degree of risk. You do have to take an experimental approach, because there isn't one binary 0 to 1 kind of answer. You're chipping away at this, even though you've got a grand vision.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on this webinar tonight. So thank you very much. No, would you like to say anything to wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's been very, very good conversation. Would love to continue having conversation. So thank you for really, really great question, everyone who's on the call. And yeah, I would like to just really, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time with different questions and panels.
Okay, brilliant. And there is networking to follow on, so it's going to go into some other rooms. If you look at the chat panel down here, it will have a link to the networking at 7 p.m. So please do feel free to log on to that and do some networking with some of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks, all.
Thanks.
Yes, bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Zeynep.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.